Yesterday morning, the courthouse smelled like old wood and rain. I remember the sound of my boots on the marble floor, slow and hollow. The kind of sound that makes you feel older than you are. I'd been called as a witness for a property dispute, just neighbor talk, boundary lines, and broken fences. Nothing worth remembering. But that was before I saw him. My grandson Eli was sitting on one of those wooden benches near the front. His legs didn't reach the floor yet, and he kept swinging them like he used to on my old porch swing. He looked small in that courtroom, smaller than I remembered. He wore the same blue jacket I'd given him last Christmas, the one with the patch of a red truck on the sleeve. I hadn't known he'd be here. His mother, my daughter, hadn't said a word. We hadn't spoken much since the funeral 2 years ago. Too many things left unsaid. Too many things said in anger. I guess time doesn't mend every kind of break. When our eyes met, he smiled, just a quick thing, like he wasn't sure if he should. I gave a nod, the kind you give when you don't trust your voice. The kind that has years packed into it. The judge walked in right then, tapping his gavel like a heartbeat against the wood. I'd seen him before, Judge Collier. We used to fish together when we were younger men. Before he wore a robe. Before I carried this much regret. They started with the case. A simple one or so, I thought. A neighbor claimed another man had moved the fence to steal 3 feet of land. 3 feet. I almost laughed. Men have lost friendships, families, even over less. The rain kept tapping on the tall windows, soft and steady. I could smell the damp coats, the wet paper, the hint of coffee someone spilled near the clerk's desk. It all mixed into something familiar, the scent of waiting. I was called up to speak. My boots thudded against the floor, echoing through that quiet hall. I told them what I'd seen, where the fence had been, how long it stood. My voice sounded dry, like gravel rolling in a tin can. The judge nodded, scribbling notes, his eyes flicking up at me from time to time. Then they called the other witness. A man I hadn't seen in years. Rick Coleman. I knew him from way back. He'd worked at the same auto shop before I retired. We'd shared beers, secrets, a few mistakes. I remembered one in particular, the kind that crawls under your skin and stays. When he took the stand, my chest tightened. I don't know if it was the smell of his aftershave or the way he avoided my eyes. He swore to tell the truth. His hand trembled just enough to notice. That's when Eli leaned close to me and whispered, soft as a breath, "Grandpa, he's lying." The words hit harder than the gavel ever could. I turned toward him, but he was staring straight ahead, eyes fixed on Rick. His jaw was set the way his father's used to be, stubborn, quiet, sure. For a moment, the courtroom faded. All I could hear was the ticking of the clock above the door and the rain outside growing heavier. I felt the years collapse, all the things I'd taught him, all the things I'd hidden. He's lying. And I knew exactly what Eli meant. Because once a long time ago, I'd lied for Rick too. The whisper didn't end at my ear, it kept ringing inside. Across the aisle, Rick smoothed his tie and cleared his throat. Judge Collier asked him about the posts, the survey, the map. Rick talked easy, like he'd practiced the story in his truck. He said the fence had always leaned closer to his shed. My watch ticked against my wrist, a metronome for memory. Each click opened a door I'd shut, then nailed shut again. Rain drummed harder on the windows as if urging me on. I first met Rick in '87, limp handshake, hungry eyes. He could fix a carburetor blindfolded, but he cut corners. Back then I was proud, a foreman with a clean bench. The radio hummed ball games while we swept the bays. One night a Buick came in after hours, bumper bent inward. A boy had been driving. A girl cried mascara like rain. The girl's wrist was swollen and blue, shaped like Ohio. Rick whispered to me, "Say we never saw them, Bob." I should have called it in. I knew the rules and reasons. Instead, I walked them out the side door toward the alley. We bent the Buick frame back with chains and a jack. He paid cash for parts from the petty drawer, no slip. Next morning, an officer came by asking about a Buick. I said we'd only seen trucks that week. Nothing unusual here. That lie still has a scent. Hot metal coffee. Rubber smoke. It clings to me when rain comes and the radio hisses. Forgiveness is heavier when you hoist it yourself every day. In court now, Rick kept spinning the story like a lug nut. He swore he never moved that fence, swore on his mother. Eli's hand found my sleeve small and sure no tremble. He didn't pull, didn't push. He simply anchored me there. I thought of teaching him to change oil last spring. He'd watched me drain the pan, wait for the last drip. He'd asked why we wait when it looks empty already. Because truth hides in the slow drip, I'd said without thinking. I stood up, forgetting the rules, and the bailiff lifted eyebrows. The judge peered over glasses, the look I knew from fishing. "Mr. Walker, you'll have your turn," he said, tone like winter. I sat, but my voice kept talking inside the bone. "The measure of a man isn't his toolbox," it whispered. "It's whether he opens it when something delicate finally breaks." The plaintiff's surveyor unfolded a map that smelled like wet ink. Lines, numbers, a tiny X where the post should rest. Rick smiled without teeth. His shoe tapped a hurried beat. I touched the watch I'd rebuilt after Mary passed 2 winters ago. Second hand, smooth as forgiveness, face scratched, but faithful. It ticked like rain on a tin roof, calling me forward. When recess was called, the room spilled into the hallway. Eli stayed seated, eyes on me, radio quiet but brave. He whispered again, softer, "Grandpa, we can fix this." Right. The word fix used to mean wrenches. Now it meant truth. Old habits are heavy, but boys watch how men lift. I breathed, and the breath tasted like coffee and apologies. Outside, the rain had eased to a patient, steady tap. I decided something I couldn't undecide, even if it hurt. Next bell, I'd stand and tell the story I'd welded shut. But confession isn't a switch. It's a bolt, rusted tight. Sometimes it only turns when a small hand steadies you. I closed my eyes, listened to the tick, and chose. When the recess ended, the courtroom air felt heavier. Maybe it was the smell of wet wool and old justice, or maybe it was my conscience finally thawing. Either way, the silence had weight. You could hear shoes squeak, papers shuffle, hearts beat. Eli sat a few rows back, now beside his mother. She wouldn't look at me. Her fingers twisted a tissue until it tore. The boy glanced between us like he knew something was about to break open. Judge Collier returned, glasses low on his nose. "Let's proceed," he said, voice steady as gravel in a pail. Rick cleared his throat again. That same nervous habit he'd had in the shop. It used to mean he was about to tell a half-truth. He started talking about the fence line again. How storms had shifted the soil, how measurements change over time. All those little excuses that sound reasonable until you remember what decency sounds like. The kind of excuses I'd once helped him make. I looked at him. Really looked. His hair was gray now, but his eyes still darted the same way. The same look he gave me that night in the garage when the girl cried behind the Buick. I'd carried his lie, and he'd carried on like it never happened. That memory came back hard. I could still feel the heat of the shop lights, the metal tang in the air. Rick's voice whispering, "You're saving me, Bob." Maybe that's what I told myself too. That I was saving a friend, but truth is, I was saving my own comfort. The lawyer asked him another question. Something about a witness statement. Rick stammered, looked toward me, then away. I felt that look hit me like an old bruise. That's when the watch ticked louder. Not really, but it felt that way, like time itself wanted to testify. I remembered what Mary used to say. You can't polish rust, Bob. You have to scrape it off. I stood. My knees cracked, my breath caught, but I stood. Your Honor, I said, voice low but firm. I need to say something. The judge sighed, rubbed his temple. Mr. Walker, please, I know I said, but I can't sit through another lie. Every head turned. Rick froze mid-sentence. Eli straightened in his seat. Even my daughter finally looked up, tears waiting on the edge. I've known Mr. Coleman 30 years, I said. And I lied once to protect him. About a wreck that should have been reported. A girl was hurt. I said, nothing. You could feel the oxygen leave the room. The rain hit the window harder, like applause from heaven or hell, I couldn't tell which. Rick's face went pale. He whispered something I couldn't hear. The judge leaned back, eyes soft but sharp. Mr. Walker, are you saying this is relevant to today's case? I'm saying I breathed a man who'll move a fence for gain once moved the truth for convenience. I helped him then. I won't help him now. No one spoke. The only sound was the tick of that clock and the rain easing off like it had done its job. Eli looked at me, proud, scared, steady. His lips moved, no sound, but I could read the word, Grandpa. For the first time, in a long time, I felt something inside loosen, like a bolt finally giving after years of rust. Maybe this wasn't about land or fences. Maybe it was about how far a man will go to put a lie back where it belongs in the ground. And right then I knew I'd just started digging. After my words settled, silence stretched like wire across the room. The judge leaned forward, elbows on the bench, studying me the way a mechanic studies an engine that shouldn't still be running. Mr. Walker, he said slowly, you understand the weight of what you've just admitted. I do, I answered. My voice felt steadier than I expected. And I should have said it a long time ago. Rick stood half out of his chair, face flushed, jaw tight. He's twisting things, Your Honor. That was decades ago. Has nothing to do with this. But the words came out brittle. You could almost hear them cracking in the air. Judge Collier didn't say anything at first. He just looked at us, both two old men from the same town, the same generation, standing on opposite sides of a truth we both knew too well. Finally, he tapped his pen once and said, Continue, Mr. Walker. I told the court everything. The Buick. The girl crying. The night I'd locked the shop door behind a secret that never should have been kept. How we bent metal and stories until they both looked straight enough to pass inspection. When I finished, no one spoke. The courtroom smelled of wet coats and guilt. Even the ceiling fans seemed to hesitate. Then Eli's small voice broke through just loud enough. So, you fixed it now, Grandpa. Every eye turned toward him. His mother tried to hush him, but I shook my head. Let him talk. He'd earned the right. I turned toward him and managed a smile. I'm trying, kiddo. Sometimes fixing takes longer than you think. He nodded, the kind of nod a boy gives when he doesn't fully understand, but wants to believe anyway. Rick muttered under his breath, You always thought you were better than me. I looked at him, not angry, just tired. No, Rick. I just finally learned I don't want to be worse. He stared at the floor, the skin around his eyes twitching. Maybe shame. Maybe memory. Hard to tell the difference in men our age. The judge cleared his throat. Mr. Coleman, do you wish to respond to these statements? Rick hesitated. His mouth opened, then shut. The rain had stopped outside, but I could still hear water dripping from the roof. Slow, deliberate, like a clock reminding us time was still passing. He finally said, I did move the fence. A few feet. I was going to move it back. A murmur rolled through the room. I closed my eyes. The sound of that confession wasn't victory. It was relief. Quiet. Heavy relief. Judge Collier leaned back and sighed. Gentlemen, I'll need to review the statements, but I think we can all agree this case has taken a different turn. He set his pen down gently. Truth has a way of arriving late, but it does arrive. He looked right at me when he said that. Maybe he remembered a different time. A fishing trip years ago, when we'd both told our own lies. Smaller ones, maybe, but the same kind of poison. The gavel struck once, calling for recess. I turned toward Eli. He was already walking down the aisle toward me. When he reached me, he didn't say anything, just wrapped his arms around my waist and pressed his cheek into my jacket. His heartbeat was fast, his breath warm. I rested my hand on his back and whispered, "That's what truth feels like, son, heavy at first. But it lets you breathe again." Outside, the clouds broke, spilling sunlight through the high windows. It landed right on the floor between me and Rick, a thin golden line. For the first time in years, I didn't feel on the wrong side of it. After recess, the courtroom felt quieter, lighter somehow. Maybe the rain had washed something off the roof of the world. Or maybe it was just me, breathing easier for the first time in years. Eli sat beside me now, his small hand resting on the worn sleeve of my jacket. My daughter stayed behind him, arms folded, eyes cautious, but not cold anymore. The distance between us had been a long road, paved with pride. Maybe today we'd started walking it back. Judge Collier came in again, his robe brushing against the floor like thunder with manners. "Mr. Coleman," he said, "you've admitted to moving the boundary. We'll discuss restitution and survey costs later. For now, I'm satisfied the truth has been established." Rick just nodded, hollow-eyed. The kind of man who realizes too late that the truth doesn't rot quietly. It waits, then knocks. As the gavel struck, the case was over. People stood, chairs scraped. But I stayed sitting. My hands trembled a little, like the engine of my old truck on a cold morning. Eli squeezed my arm. "You did good, Grandpa," he said. His voice had that steadiness kids get when they're proud and don't quite know how to show it. I looked down at him, smiled. "Took me long enough, huh?" He grinned. Grandma would have liked that. Those words, they hit deeper than I expected. I could almost smell Mary's coffee, hear her voice humming along with the radio in our kitchen. She'd been the honest one between us. The one who used to say, "Bob, truth don't rust, it just waits for the right wrench." I guess this was mine. We walked out together. Me, Eli, and my daughter. The courthouse steps were slick with rain, and the sky had that soft, washed blue look that comes after a storm. The kind that makes everything smell like hope and asphalt. For a while, none of us said much. You could hear our shoes tapping and a distant train horn cutting through the drizzle. Then my daughter spoke, her voice low, almost unsure. "I didn't know about that night. The accident." I nodded. "You weren't supposed to. I thought I was protecting you. But I guess I was just protecting myself." She looked at me, then eyes red but kind. "You did the right thing today, Dad." Those words carried a kind of forgiveness that no verdict could ever deliver. It didn't erase the years between us, but it softened them like rain softening old dirt. We reached the truck, my old Chevy paint-faded seat cracked. The same one Eli always begged to ride in. I opened the passenger door for him, and he climbed up, wiping fog off the glass with his sleeve. As I turned the key, the radio flickered on by itself, static first, then a slow country tune. Half signal, half ghost. The kind of song Mary used to hum. Eli laughed. "Your truck's haunted, Grandpa," maybe I said, smiling. "But some ghosts don't mean harm. Some just like to hear the truth travel." We sat there for a moment, engine idling radio whispering through the static. Outside, a puddle shimmered under the new sun, catching the reflection of the courthouse. Solid old, still standing. I looked at Eli in the mirror. He was tapping the dashboard like a heartbeat. That small rhythm. That quiet joy. Maybe it was the sound of something being repaired, slow and honest. And as we pulled away from that courthouse, I felt the weight shift from guilt to grace, from silence to sound. Somewhere, between the rain and the hum of the tires, I realized it wasn't the judge who'd forgiven me. It was the boy beside me. We didn't talk much on the drive home. The road stretched ahead wet and gleaming under the late afternoon Sunday. Steam rose from the blacktop, like ghosts finding their way back to heaven. I let the engine hum fill the quiet. It's funny, silence can hurt when it's empty, but this one felt different. It was peace, with a pulse. Eli rolled the window down halfway. The wind mussed his hair, carrying that smell of wet earth and gasoline. "Grandpa," he said, after a while, "why'd you lie for him back then?" I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. Because I was scared, I guess. Afraid of losing a friend. Afraid of trouble. Afraid of being the bad guy. He thought about that, squinting into the light. But you weren't the bad guy. You were just quiet. Quiet. That word sat heavy. I'd been quiet most of my life, when I should have spoken, when I should have fought, when I should have told Mary what she meant to me before it was too late. Quiet's easier. Until it isn't. We passed the old mill pond, the one where I'd taught him to skip rocks last summer. The water still held rain, ripples, circles within circles. "You know," I said, nodding toward it, "truth's a bit like that. You throw it out there, it makes waves you can't control." Eli smiled, his reflection trembling in the glass. "Yeah, but it's better than keeping the rock in your pocket." The kid had a way of saying things like he'd lived twice already. Maybe he had. Some people are born with an old soul. And his felt like one of them. When we turned down the gravel road toward my house, the clouds were breaking apart, gold seeping through. My garage came into view. Old siding rust spots, a coffee can full of screws on the porch rail. It looked like time itself had stopped there and never started again. I parked and killed the engine. The ticking of the motor blended with the ticking of my watch. A small duet between metal and memory. "Come on," I said. "Let's go inside." The kitchen smelled like sawdust and yesterday's coffee. I poured us each a cup, his mostly milk, mine mostly black. He sat at the table, tracing circles in a ring of spilled sugar. "Grandpa," he asked, "what happened to that girl from the Buick?" I stared at the steam rising from my mug. "She lived," I said softly, "but her life got smaller after that. We took something from her, not her breath, but her trust." He nodded slowly. "So that's why you told the truth today." "That's part of it." I looked up, met his eyes. "The rest is because you were there. You reminded me of what kind of man I wanted you to think I was." He didn't say anything for a while. Just took a sip and watched the rain drip off the eaves outside. Then he smiled a little. "Mom says people don't change much." I chuckled. "Maybe not all at once. But sometimes they fix a small piece, and the rest follows." Outside, the radio in the garage crackled faintly to life static. Then, a preacher's voice fading in and out, talking about forgiveness and time. I hadn't turned it on. Maybe the storm had, or maybe something else had decided it was time I listened. Eli heard it too. "You still believe in that stuff?" I shrugged. "I believe in second chances. The rest, I'm still figuring out." He grinned. "That's okay. I think Grandma already forgave you anyway." The words caught me mid-breath. I looked toward the window. Sunlight spilled through dust, floating like small souls in the beam. Maybe I whispered. Maybe she did. The house was quiet again, but not empty. The kind of quiet that holds space for something new. That night, the house carried its usual sounds: the creak of old beams, the hum of the fridge, the soft click of the clock above the kitchen door. But beneath all that, there was a new rhythm. One I hadn't heard in years. Peace has its own kind of music if you listen close enough. Eli had fallen asleep on the couch, blanket half off hair, still damp from the rain. He'd spent the evening poking through my old toolbox, asking what each wrench and socket was for. I'd told him stories behind every dent and scratch, and for once the telling didn't ache. I poured myself another cup of coffee, though it was late. The rain had started again, gentle. This time a steady whisper against the window. Outside, the yard light flickered through the mist, like a heartbeat. I sat by the window and let my mind wander back to Mary. She'd always said truth was like oil in an engine: leave it unchecked long enough, and everything seizes up. Maybe that's what happened to me. After she passed, he just stopped moving. When Eli stirred on the couch, I turned down the lamp. He mumbled something half dream, half thought. "Grandpa, don't let him lie again." I smiled, quiet and sad. Even asleep, the boy carried conscience like it was inheritance. I wondered if it came from me, or if he was born trying to fix what I'd broken. The radio in the garage crackled again, soft static rolling through the walls. It wasn't tuned to any station, just that kind of ghost frequency that hums between memories. I could almost hear Mary's voice in it. Not words, just presence. I opened the back door, stepped onto the porch. The boards groaned under my boots. The air smelled of wet dirt, iron, and honeysuckle. Somewhere down the road, a lone dog barked. The world felt wide and quiet. I thought about calling Rick, about telling him I didn't hate him, that I hoped he'd fix what he could too. But forgiveness doesn't always need an audience. Sometimes it just needs a man to mean it. So I whispered it into the rain instead. "I forgive you, Rick. And I forgive me." The wind caught the words and carried them away somewhere between the trees and the stars. When I went back inside, Eli had rolled over, clutching the blanket like a promise. I picked it up and tucked it under his chin. For a second, I saw his father's face in the same stubborn jaw, same quiet strength. It made something warm settle in my chest. Before heading to bed, I wound my old pocket watch, the one Mary gave me the year we married. It hadn't ticked in months, but tonight it started up again, slow and sure. I listened for a long time, smiling through the ache. As I turned off the lamp, I caught my reflection in the window, a tired old man in a quiet house, rain behind him, forgiveness ahead. I realized then that maybe redemption doesn't come all at once. Maybe it arrives in small, careful steps, like a boy's whisper in a courtroom, or a clock starting up after years of stillness. And as I lay down, the rain slowed to a faint drizzle. The watch ticked beside me, and I thought, maybe, just maybe, tomorrow would sound a little like mercy. Morning came, soft gold spilling through the blinds like forgiveness with sunlight attached. I woke to the smell of toast and the sound of Eli rummaging through the drawers. The boy had found the old radio on the kitchen counter and somehow coaxed it back to life. It hissed between stations, catching fragments of country songs and church sermons. "Morning, Grandpa," he said, grinning, as if the world was simple again. I made breakfast. He'd burned the toast on one side and undercooked the eggs, but it tasted better than anything I'd had in years. Maybe because it came from honest hands. After we ate, I stepped onto the porch with my coffee. The rain had left puddles in the driveway, each one mirroring a piece of sky. My truck sat there, damp rust glinting in the light. I ran my hand across the hood. Still here, I muttered, not sure if I meant the truck or me. Eli joined me, holding his cup of milk like it was something sacred. Are you going to go see him? Who? Mr. Coleman. The question cut clean. I hadn't decided yet. Part of me wanted to leave it alone, let time do the rest. But time doesn't fix everything. Sometimes, it just buries the parts we're too afraid to dig up. Maybe I said. You think I should? Eli looked out at the road, the morning fog curling around the mailbox. Mom says people should make peace while they still remember why they need to. That one landed. Kids say things plain, no polish, no fence posts hiding the truth. I nodded slowly. You know, your grandma used to say something like that too. What'd she say? She said forgiveness is the only thing that still grows in bad soil. He thought about that for a while, then smiled. Then we better start planting. I laughed. It felt strange in my throat, rusty. Almost new. You're something, kid. We spent the next hour out in the garage. The air smelled like oil and dust, the kind of smell that can bring back whole decades in one breath. I turned on the light, and the radio on the shelf flickered again, that same soft static from last night. I swear sometimes it hums to the rhythm of my memories. Eli found my old fishing poles in the corner, tangled lines and chipped paint. Did you fish with the judge? He asked. Yeah, I said, before he wore the robe. We caught more lies than fish, though. He laughed, that clear young laugh that makes even old regrets sound lighter. I started cleaning one of the reels, hands steady, eyes softer than they'd been in a long while. The boy watched every motion, learning without asking. After a while, he said, "You're different now." How so? You look lighter. I thought about that. Maybe I was. Maybe confession is a kind of lifting, even if it doesn't fix the past. Tell you what I said after lunch. We'll drive into town. See Rick. Eli nodded, but his expression turned serious. What if he's still angry? Then I'll let him be. Forgiveness ain't a trade, it's a gift. You don't give it because someone deserves it. You give it because you can. The boy nodded again. Quiet. Thoughtful. Then the radio popped once, and through the static came a line of some old gospel song. Let the rain wash the wrong away. We just stood there listening. The morning felt holy in its own small way. No church, no preacher, just a man, a boy, and the sound of a radio, remembering something kind. The road to town cut through fields still slick with rain. Corn stalks bowed low, holding drops that caught the sunlight like pieces of glass. Eli sat quiet beside me, one hand tracing shapes on the fogged window. The radio hummed softly. No music this time, just static, breathing in and out like it knew the day needed quiet. I'd driven this road 1,000 times before, but it felt different now. Like every mailbox and fence post had a memory attached. Every curve, a question I'd been avoiding. Rick lived on the edge of town, down a gravel lane behind the feed store. His place used to be sharp-painted, porch-trimmed hedges. Now, it looked tired. Paint peeling gutters, sagging a busted mower, sitting by the steps. As we pulled in, I saw him through the window, sitting at the table, shoulders hunched, cigarette burning between his fingers. He didn't look up when I knocked, just called doors open. Inside, the air smelled like stale smoke and damp wood. The radio on his counter murmured an old blues tune barely there. Rick didn't stand. Didn't have to. The years between us sat in the chair beside him. Didn't think you'd come, he said, voice rough, eyes fixed on the ashtray. I almost didn't, I admitted, but the boy thought I should. His eyes flicked toward Eli, standing by the door. That your grandson? Yeah. Name's Ellie. Rick nodded once. Smart kid. He's the one who saw through me, huh? I didn't answer. Didn't need to. Truth had already been said once this week. It didn't need repeating. Rick rubbed his face with both hands, the years etched deep around his mouth. You know, he said, after court I sat here half the night. Couldn't stop hearing that kid's voice. He's lying. Guess I've been lying so long I forgot how to stop. I sat across from him, the chair creaking under my weight. We all forget, I said. But remembering's what saves us. For a while we just listened to the rain starting up again, soft, slow, steady. The same rhythm that's followed me most of my life. Rick stubbed out his cigarette and said, You were right to tell the truth. I was wrong. Not just about the fence. About a lot of things. He looked up then, eyes wet but clear. I never thanked you for covering for me back then. And I never apologized for making you do it. You just did, I said quietly. He nodded, swallowed hard. I guess I did. Eli shifted his weight, nervous, like he didn't know if he should speak. Then he said softly, My grandma says when people forgive each other, angels stop holding their breath. Rick chuckled, surprised. Your grandma sounds wise. She was, I said. Still is, maybe. Rick leaned back, staring at the window, streaked with rain. You ever think we'd end up like this, Bob, two old fools talking about angels? Can't say I did, I said. But I'm glad we did. He smiled then. Small. Cracked. But real. You think the judge will still fish with us? I laughed. Maybe. If we promise not to lie about the size this time. The rain thickened outside, drumming on the tin roof like a slow applause. For once it didn't sound sad. Just honest. As we stood to leave, Rick reached out, hand shaking slightly. I took it. His grip was weak, but it held something true. Take care of the boy, he said. I will, I replied. He's taking care of me too. When we stepped back into the rain, Eli slipped his hand into mine. He's not so bad, huh? I smiled, watching the house fade behind us in the mist. No, I said softly. Just a man trying to remember who he used to be. The rain followed us halfway home, tapping the windshield like it had something more to say. Eli leaned against the seat, quiet again, his breath fogging the glass. He'd been like that since we left Rick's place. Thoughtful, far away. Like he'd seen more than a boy should. You okay, kiddo? I asked. He nodded. Yeah, just thinking. About what? About how people can be bad and good at the same time. I smiled a little. That's most folks, Eli. Sometimes, even on the same day. He turned toward me. Was Rick your friend? He was, I said. Still is in a way. Eli frowned. Even after he made you lie. Especially after I said eyes still on the road. Friends. Don't stop being friends just because they break something. They try to fix it. Or they live with the crack. He nodded slowly, processing that. Then he said, I think I like fixing better. Me too, I said, smiling at the road. We passed the old railroad, crossing the one that hadn't worked right since before Eli was born. The light flashed red even when no train came. Something about it felt right. Warning without danger. Memory without motion. When we pulled into the driveway, the rain had stopped again. The sky broke open, and a weak rainbow stretched over the trees. The kind you almost miss if you're not looking. Eli jumped out, landing in a puddle, water splashing his jeans. Look, Grandpa, he shouted, pointing upward. I stepped out, leaned against the door, and just watched him. His laughter filled the yard, bouncing off the wet fence and the garage walls. It hit me then. That sound, that joy, that's what forgiveness is supposed to feel like. Not quiet or heavy, but alive. After dinner, we sat on the porch with 2 mugs of cocoa. The air smelled like rain-soaked pine. The sun was sinking, turning the puddles into small pools of gold. Grandpa, Eli said. Did you ever lie to Grandma? That one hit deeper than the rest. I stared into my cup for a long while before I answered. Once I said, told her, I was okay when I wasn't. She saw through it, of course. What'd she do? She made coffee. Then she sat beside me until I told the truth. He smiled. Guess that's love, huh? Yeah, I said softly. That's love. A train whistle sounded faint in the distance, and the night filled with that low hum. I've always loved the sound of things moving forward. Eli leaned his head on my arm. The porch light buzzed above us, drawing moths that flickered like tiny ghosts. Will you ever go back to the shop? He asked suddenly. I looked at my hands, calloused, stained, still carrying grease lines that time never washed out. Maybe, I said. Not to work. Just to say goodbye properly. He nodded, thoughtful as ever. Can I come? Wouldn't have it any other way. The wind picked up, rustling the trees. The radio inside clicked on again, soft static rolling through the doorway. It was faint, but I could make out a line from an old song. The storm has passed, but the ground still shines. Eli whispered Grandma's song. I froze. You know that tune? He nodded. Mom sings it sometimes. Says it helps her sleep. I looked toward the radio, then up at the darkening sky. Maybe it was coincidence. Or maybe some people just refuse to stay silent once you finally learn to listen. Either way, I felt the same thing I'd felt in court, that quiet, steady kind of grace that doesn't ask for applause. It just lingers, like rain on old tin. The next morning, I woke before the Sunday. The world was still dark, but the horizon had that faint gray promise that meant day was coming, whether I was ready or not. I poured a cup of coffee, opened the back door, and stepped outside. The air was cool and clean, the kind that tastes like new beginnings. I stood there listening to the birds starting up, to the quiet hum of the highway miles away, to my own heartbeat keeping slow time. For years, mornings had felt heavy, but that day it felt like the world was breathing with me, not against me. Eli came out a few minutes later, yawning, his hair sticking up in a dozen directions. You're up early, he mumbled. Old men don't sleep much, I said with a smile. Too many memories making noise. He grinned. Want me to make breakfast? Only if you promise not to burn it this time. He saluted like a soldier and went back inside. I watched the kitchen light flicker on, soft and golden. It reminded me of Mary, how she'd hum under her breath every morning while frying eggs, how she'd set my coffee beside the paper before I even sat down. I missed her most on mornings like that, when forgiveness felt simple enough to taste, but not quite touch. After breakfast, we drove into town again. I wanted to stop by the old shop. The sign still read Walker and Sons Auto, though there hadn't been any Sons in a long time. The windows were dusty, the bay doors rusted shut. But standing there, I could still hear the old rhythms. The air gun whine, the clang of dropped tools, the low murmur of the radio behind the counter. Eli walked beside me, eyes wide. You really worked here. 32 years, I said, brushing dust off the door handle. Longer than I should have, maybe. What did you like most about it? The sound, I said. Engines talking back. Every noise meant something. A rattle. A cough. A hum. All little truths waiting for someone to listen. I pulled the door open. It groaned like it hadn't been moved in years. The air inside was cool and smelled of oil, rust, and time. My old workbench still sat against the wall, the radio perched, right where I'd left it. Can I turn it on? Eli asked. Sure. He twisted the dial. Static first, then a soft crackle, and then somehow the same gospel tune from the day before came drifting through, faint but clear. Let the rain wash the wrong away. Eli froze. That's her song again. I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. The radio hadn't worked in years, but there it was, alive and humming like it remembered me. I walked over, touched the casing. It vibrated faintly under my hand. "Guess she's still keeping an eye on us," I whispered. Eli smiled. "Think she's proud of you?" "I hope so," I said. I finally told the truth. "Maybe that's enough." He stepped closer, leaned his head against my arm. "It is." We stood there for a long time, just the two of us, and that old song echoing through the empty shop. Dust floated in the sunlight like slow snow, and the air felt full of ghosts, but friendly ones. When the song faded back into static, I turned to Eli. "Come on, kid. Let's go home. I think we've done enough fixing for one lifetime." He grinned. "You sure?" "Not really," I said, laughing. "But I think that's the point." As we walked out, I glanced back once more. The radio crackled again one last time like a goodbye. Then silence. The good kind. Outside, the sun had fully risen. It caught the puddles in the gravel, turned them into mirrors of light. I watched Eli jump over each one carefree, leaving ripples behind him. And for the first time in years, I didn't look away. The following week passed quiet as dust. I fixed small things around the house. A loose hinge, a flickering light, the leaky faucet that had sung at night for months. Funny how fixing one truth makes you see every other thing that's broken. Eli spent his afternoons drawing trucks in a notebook while I worked. He'd hum that gospel tune under his breath, the one the radio played. Sometimes I caught myself humming along. I didn't even know the words, but maybe I didn't need them. Some songs just live in the bones. On Thursday, my daughter came by. She stood at the porch steps a while before knocking a habit of someone deciding whether to forgive. When I opened the door, she gave me a small smile that looked like her mother's. "Mind if I come in?" she asked. "Door's always open," I said, stepping aside. She glanced around the living room, the photos, the coffee mug stains, Eli's drawings spread out on the table. "He's been talking about you non-stop," she said softly. "Says you're different now." I chuckled. "He makes me want to be." We sat for a while the way people do when they're learning to speak to each other again. I poured her coffee. She stared at her cup a long time before saying, "I was angry at you, Dad. After Mom died, I thought you just stopped caring." "I did," I said quietly. "About everything. It was easier than hurting." Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't understand that then. I do now." Outside, the rain began again, soft and steady, as if it had been listening and chose that moment to join in. "I saw Rick in town," she said. "He told me you two talked." He looked lighter. I nodded. "Yeah. We both did." She smiled faintly. "Eli's learning a lot from you. But I think you're learning more from him." "Maybe so." I looked out the window where Eli was tossing pebbles into puddles. Each one made a perfect circle, widening out until it disappeared. "He reminds me what honesty sounds like." She followed my gaze. "He said something the other day. Told me that when Grandpa tells the truth, the rain stops listening." I laughed softly. Kid's got a poet's soul. We talked until the coffee turned cold. Then she stood and walked to the old piano against the wall, Mary's piano. She pressed one key, then another, testing it, like she was checking if memory still worked. The sound was slightly off but warm. "Do you still play?" she asked. "Not since she's been gone," I admitted. She looked back at me, eyes kind. "Maybe you should." When she left, the house stayed full, not empty like it used to after goodbyes. I sat at the piano, fingers hovering over the keys. They felt clumsy, foreign, but when I pressed one, it made a sound that seemed to fit the rain outside. I tried the melody from that old gospel tune, fumbling at first, then finding the rhythm. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Eli came running in when he heard it, eyes wide. "You're playing Grandma's song." "Trying to," I said, smiling. He sat beside me and pressed a few keys of his own. Together it didn't sound like much, just two generations trying to remember how to sing again. But in that moment, with rain tapping on the windows and the house breathing quietly around us, it felt like something holy had finally come home. Saturday came with a sky clear enough to believe in. The storm clouds were gone, the air cool and sharp. The kind of morning that makes even an old man feel like he's got work left to do. Eli was up before me, waiting by the truck with his fishing pole. "You said we'd go," he reminded, tapping the door like the world might end if we didn't. I smiled. "Guess I did." We packed coffee sandwiches and Mary's old thermos, the red one with a dent near the bottom. I hadn't used it in years. The lid still smelled faintly of her perfume. As I screwed it on, I felt something twist in my chest, not from grief anymore, but gratitude. The lake sat quiet when we got there. Mist curled over the surface, soft as breath. A few ducks floated near the reeds, and the air tasted of pine and morning. We set up near the old dock boards, warped and gray. Eli cast his line first, the lure plopping into the still water. "Think we'll catch anything?" he asked. "Doesn't matter," I said, lowering mine beside his. "We're here, that's enough." He grinned. "That sounds like something Grandma would say." Probably because she said it first. We sat in silence a long while, the kind that doesn't need filling. The water lapped against the dock. My watch ticked in time. Across the lake, a heron stood motionless, patient and tall. "You know," I said after a while, "your grandma and I used to fish here every Sunday after church." She'd hum that same song while we waited. Eli smiled. "The rain one." "Yeah," said it made the fish braver. He giggled, tugging lightly on his pole. "Guess it worked." I watched his reflection ripple in the water, and something in me softened. That boy had carried me further than I ever thought I'd go again. "You ever miss her, Grandpa?" "Every day," I said. "But missing her's what keeps me remembering right. If I stop missing, I stop learning." He nodded slowly, eyes serious. "Do you think she's proud of you now?" I looked out at the water sunlight breaking into pieces on the surface. "I think she's smiling somewhere," I said. "Probably laughing that it took me this long to grow up." Eli chuckled, and the sound felt like fresh wind through an old house. Around noon, we ate our sandwiches and shared the last of the coffee. The thermos kept it warm, same as always. When Eli finished his half, he handed me the empty cup. "Grandma's still keeping us fed," he said matter-of-factly. I nodded. She always did. The radio I'd brought along sat on the bench beside us, old batteries rattling inside. I turned it on out of habit. Static at first, then faint. As memory came, the soft hum of that gospel tune again. Eli froze, eyes wide. "Grandpa, how does it always find us?" I looked at the lake, then up at the clouds forming thin streaks of white over blue. "Maybe we don't find truth," I said. "Maybe it follows us until we're ready to listen." He smiled, quiet, thoughtful. "Like the rain. Exactly like the rain." We packed up as the sun dipped lower, painting the water gold. The world felt rinsed clean, not perfect, just honest. And maybe that's all redemption ever really is. As we walked back to the truck, Eli slipped his hand into mine again. It was small, warm, alive. The kind of touch that steadies you without asking to. I looked down at him and said, "You know, someday you'll have your own lies to face. Just remember, telling the truth won't always fix everything." He looked up, curious. "Then why tell it?" "Because it keeps your soul from rusting," I said, smiling. "And rust spreads fast." He nodded, understanding more than I expected for his age. The wind picked up, rippling the lake behind us. The radio in my hand went silent again, leaving only the sound of the breeze and the soft creak of the dock boards as we left. And somehow that silence felt like the truest sound of all. That night after Eli had gone to bed, I sat alone on the porch. The moon was high and pale, caught behind slow-moving clouds. The yard smelled like damp leaves and fresh soil. Every sound carried crickets the wind through the maple, the faint hum of the power lines along the road. I held Mary's old thermos in my hands. It was still warm from the coffee we'd shared at the lake. I ran my thumb over the dent near the bottom and thought about how even broken things can hold warmth if you treat them right. The screen door creaked. My daughter stepped out, wrapping her sweater tight around her shoulders. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "Not tonight," I said. "Too much moving around up here." I tapped my temple. She sat beside me, pulling her knees close. "Eli's out cold." He talked himself to sleep, telling me all about the lake. Said the fish were shy, but honest. I chuckled. "That sounds like him." We sat quiet for a bit, the night wrapping around us. She looked at me and said, "You know, Mom used to sit here like this." Said the world made more sense after dark. She wasn't wrong, I murmured. She leaned her head against my shoulder, something she hadn't done since she was a little girl. "Dad, I'm sorry for all those years I kept you out." I didn't understand what silence costs a person. I swallowed hard, the lump thick in my throat. "You don't owe me an apology, sweetheart. I gave you every reason to shut the door. I just never stopped hoping you'd open it again." She smiled through her tears. "Looks like you got your wish." We sat that way for a long time. The porch light buzzed, throwing a soft halo on the steps. Somewhere inside the radio clicked faintly as if waking. A low hum drifted through the screen, that same gospel tune again, but slower this time, like it was breathing with us. She noticed it too. "That radio's been doing that all week," she said. "I know," I replied. "I've stopped trying to explain it." We listened, the melody rolling out into the quiet yard. It wasn't spooky or strange. It was comfort. A sound that reminded me we weren't alone in our mending. "Mom would have liked this," she whispered. "She's here," I said softly. "Always has been." The song faded, leaving only the steady ticking of my watch. I realized then that the tick was perfectly in rhythm with the beat of her heart against my arm. Life, memory, forgiveness, all keeping time together. After a while, she stood, kissed my cheek, and said, "Come to church with us. Tomorrow." Eli's singing in the kids' choir. I smiled. Wouldn't miss it. When she went inside, I stayed a little longer. The moon broke free from the clouds, washing the porch in silver. I thought about the courtroom, the lake, the boy's whisper, the years of rust. And I realized something simple: the truth doesn't just set you free. It lets the people you love breathe easier too. The porch boards creaked beneath my feet as I stood. I looked up at the stars, took one deep breath, and whispered into the night, "Thank you, Mary, for waiting on me." A single breeze passed through, light and warm, carrying the faint scent of her perfume, the same note that lingered in that red thermos. I smiled, knowing the message was heard. Inside, the clock chimed midnight. Another day done. But for once, it didn't feel like time slipping away. It felt like time forgiven. Sunday morning came dressed in sunlight. The sky stretched wide and clean, the kind of blue that almost hums when you look long enough. I ironed the one good shirt I had left, the white one Mary bought me for Easter years ago. The collar was a little frayed, but it smelled like cedar and soap-like memory that refuses to fade. When we pulled into the church lot, the bell was already ringing. Folks stood in small groups, shaking hands, sharing smiles that came easier after the rain. I hadn't been there since Mary's funeral. My boots felt heavier walking up those steps, but Eli grabbed my hand and tugged. "Come on, Grandpa. We'll be late." Inside, sunlight poured through the stained glass windows, painting the pews in warm colors. Reds, blues, golds, like the inside of forgiveness itself. My daughter led us to a seat near the back. The choir was lining up, and there he was. Eli standing tall, nervous grin on his face. He waved when he saw me. My heart caught somewhere between pride and ache. The organ began low and steady. Then the children started singing, "Let the rain wash the wrong away." The same song that had followed us all week. The same one Mary used to hum. My throat tightened. Every note felt like a letter I'd never sent. Every lyric a piece of her voice carried through time. People around me sang softly, but I couldn't make a sound. I just listened to the music, to the small breaths between words, to the way the sunlight trembled on the wood floor. When the song ended, the pastor spoke about grace. Not the kind you earn, he said, but the kind that waits. The kind that stands at your door until you finally open it. I felt that, deep. After the service, people shook my hand. Some remembered me from the shop, some from town. Their smiles weren't pity, they were understanding. The quiet kind of welcome you only get once you've come clean. Eli ran up his face, flushed from singing. "Did you hear me, Grandpa?" Every word I said, voice rough. "You sounded just like her." He smiled. "Grandma, yeah, just like her." On the drive home, the world looked brighter, like someone had turned up the dimmer switch on life. The fields glistened, the fences stood straight, and even the clouds seemed tired of hiding. When we pulled into the driveway, I left the truck running for a moment, listening to the engine's hum. It sounded healthy again. Steady. Machines like people run better when they've got nothing left to hide. We went inside. The house smelled of coffee and sunlight through old curtains. I hung my shirt on the back of the chair and sat at the piano. The keys were cool under my fingers. Eli stood beside me. "Play Grandma's song," he said. I nodded. "You start it." He hit the first note, and I followed. The melody rose gentle and true, filling the house with something lighter than air. Somewhere between the notes, I could almost hear her humming along. When the last chord faded, I looked at him and said, "You keep that song close, Eli. It'll remind you how to find your way back when the world gets loud." He nodded, serious. "I will." We sat there a long while after that, just listening to the quiet. The rain had stopped days ago, but I swear, if you listened close enough, you could still hear its echo, soft, forgiving, steady, as a heartbeat. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my old watch. It was still ticking, smooth and calm. I set it on the piano beside the photo of Mary. The second hand glided forward, never rushing, never stalling. And I thought, maybe time doesn't heal you. Maybe it just gives you another chance to tell the truth before it's too late. The house sighed around us, wood settling, pipes cooling, peace taking root. Outside, the wind stirred the chimes on the porch. They played a tune I didn't recognize, but somehow I knew who sent it. She was still here.